What you're about to hear will chill you to the bone. This is the true story of a man who simply vanished into the Pacific Northwest darkness. This case remained unsolved for over 3 years. Every detail has been verified through official police reports, coroner's documentation, and witness statements. This is declassified horror, bringing you documented cases that defy explanation. Terry Shinaver was no ordinary missing person. He was a tow truck driver, a man who spent his life rescuing others from roadside emergencies, a professional who knew every back road, every dangerous curve, every potential hazard in southwest Washington. On April 30th, 2021, Terry made what should have been a routine trip. He drove to the Alani Casino Resort in Ridgefield, Washington. It was a Friday evening, the kind of night when the casino would be buzzing with weekend energy. Terry was 32 years old. He lived across the state border in St. Helens, Oregon. The drive to Alani was familiar territory, less than an hour on well-traveled roads. He'd made this trip countless times before, but this time was different. This time, Terry Shinaver would never make it home. The casino's security cameras captured him that evening, moving through the gaming floor, playing the slots. Nothing seemed unusual. Nothing suggested the horror that was about to unfold. Then the trail went cold. When Terry didn't return home, his family knew something was terribly wrong. This wasn't a man who disappeared without explanation. He was reliable, responsible, the kind of person who always checked in. 2 weeks later, the St. Helens Police Department posted his photograph on social media. They included a picture of his truck, a desperate plea for information. Someone, somewhere, had to have seen something, but nobody came forward. The case file grew thin. Leads evaporated like morning mist over the Columbia River. Terry Shinaver had simply vanished into the Pacific Northwest wilderness. Months turned into years. His family never stopped hoping, never stopped wondering what happened on that dark April night. Private investigators were hired. Reward money was posted. Nothing worked. The police had theories, of course. Maybe Terry had gambling debts. Maybe he'd run into trouble at the casino. Maybe he'd decided to start a new life somewhere else. But those who knew him best rejected these explanations. Terry wasn't the type to abandon his family. He wasn't the type to fake his own disappearance. 3 years passed. 3 long years of unanswered questions. 3 years of sleepless nights for his loved ones. The case had gone completely cold. Most people assumed Terry Shinaver would never be found. Then came December 7th, 2024. A tow truck driver received a routine call. Someone had reported a vehicle that had gone off Dickey Road in Woodland, Washington. Just another day on the job. Another car to pull from a ditch or creek. But when the heavy chains were attached and the winch began to pull, something felt wrong. The weight was all wrong. The resistance was too great. Slowly, impossibly, a truck emerged from the murky water. Not the vehicle they'd been called to recover. This was something else entirely. Something that had been hidden beneath the surface for a very long time. The driver's door was closed. The windows were dark, and inside, barely visible through the water-stained glass, was the skeletal remains of a human being. The responding officers immediately recognized the significance of what they'd found. This wasn't just any submerged vehicle. The license plate matched a truck that had been missing for over 3 years, Terry Shinaver's truck. The Cowlitz County Coroner's Office took possession of the remains. Dental records were compared. DNA samples were analyzed. After weeks of forensic investigation, the identification was confirmed. Terry Shinaver had been found. But finding him only deepened the mystery. How had his truck ended up in the water off Dyke Road? This location was only 6 miles from the Alani Casino, close enough that Terry could have driven there directly from the casino. But why would he have taken this route? Dyke Road was not on the direct path between the casino and Terry's home in Oregon. It was a rural road, sparsely traveled, especially at night. Not the kind of road a professional driver would choose unless he had a specific reason. The coroner's investigation revealed that Terry had died from accidental drowning. There were no signs of foul play, no evidence of violence, no indication that anyone else had been involved. But this finding only raised more questions. How does an experienced driver accidentally drive into water? Terry knew these roads. He'd driven in all weather conditions. He understood the dangers of rural highways. Some investigators theorized that Terry might have been following his GPS and taken a wrong turn. Others suggested he might have been trying to avoid something on the main road. A few wondered if he'd been experiencing a medical emergency, but none of these explanations felt complete. None of them could account for why Terry's truck had remained hidden for so long. Why hadn't other drivers spotted the submerged vehicle? Why hadn't anyone reported seeing tire tracks leading off the road? The water where Terry's truck was found wasn't particularly deep. During certain seasons, parts of the vehicle might have been visible above the surface, yet somehow it had remained completely hidden for over 3 years. Local residents were shocked by the discovery. Many of them drove past that stretch of Dyke Road regularly. Some had even participated in the original search efforts. The idea that Terry had been so close all along was deeply disturbing. For Terry's family, the discovery brought both relief and renewed anguish. Finally, they had answers about what had happened to their loved one. But those answers came with their own painful questions. Why had Terry driven to such a remote location? What had he been thinking in those final moments? Had he called out for help? Had he tried to escape from the sinking truck? The tow truck driver who found Terry's vehicle was deeply affected by the discovery. He'd pulled countless cars from ditches and waterways, but finding human remains was something entirely different, something that would haunt him for the rest of his career. The official investigation concluded that Terry's death was accidental, a tragic case of a driver losing control and ending up in the water. The case was officially closed, but for those who knew Terry best, questions remain. How does a professional tow truck driver, someone who spent his career helping others navigate dangerous roads, accidentally drive into water? How does a man simply vanish for 3 years, only to be found 6 miles from where he was last seen? The truth is that we may never know exactly what happened on that dark April night in 2021. We may never understand why Terry Shinaver left the casino and drove toward Dyke Road instead of heading home to Oregon. What we do know is that the Pacific Northwest highways can be unforgiving, that even experienced drivers can find themselves in situations they never anticipated, that sometimes people disappear into the darkness and don't emerge for years. Terry Shinaver's story serves as a chilling reminder that horror doesn't always come from supernatural sources. Sometimes the most terrifying stories are the ones that happen to ordinary people doing ordinary things. Sometimes a simple drive home becomes a journey into the unknown, a trip from which there is no return. The next time you're driving alone on a dark highway, remember Terry Shinaver. Remember that experience doesn't always protect you. Remember that some roads lead to places you never intended to go. And remember that in the Pacific Northwest, the forests and waterways keep their secrets for a very long time, sometimes forever. What you're about to hear happened on a quiet Monday evening in May 2024. This is the documented account of a catastrophic crash that turned Utah's scenic Highway 189 into a deadly trap. This story has been verified through official Utah Department of Public Safety reports, witness statements, and emergency response documentation. Every detail comes from official sources. This is declassified horror, bringing you true stories that professional drivers face on America's most dangerous highways. Richard Bowman was 62 years old, a veteran truck driver from Torrey, Utah. For decades, he'd navigated the treacherous mountain highways of the American West. He knew every curve, every grade, every potential hazard that these roads could throw at him. On May 20th, 2024, Richard was hauling his most dangerous cargo yet, 12,000 gallons of propane, enough explosive fuel to level city blocks, enough to turn a simple traffic accident into a catastrophic disaster. Highway 189 cuts through some of Utah's most beautiful terrain. The road winds alongside Deer Creek Reservoir, offering breathtaking views of pristine mountain water surrounded by towering peaks. But beauty often masks danger on America's highways. It was 7:12 in the evening when Richard's nightmare began. He was traveling southbound, approaching mile marker 24. This section of highway is notorious among professional drivers. Steep grades, sharp curves, unforgiving guardrails that separate the roadway from deep, cold water. For reasons that investigators still cannot explain, Richard's massive semi-truck suddenly veered off the road. The truck jackknifed. This is when the trailer swings around at a 90-degree angle to the cab, a maneuver that even the most experienced drivers struggle to control. The guardrail never stood a chance. 12,000 gallons of propane, plus the weight of the truck and trailer, smashed through the barrier like it was made of cardboard. Then came the plunge into Deer Creek Reservoir. The impact was catastrophic. The propane tank ruptured immediately. Invisible clouds of deadly gas began billowing into the evening air. The trailer remained partially above water, but the cab disappeared completely beneath the surface. Richard Bowman was trapped inside. Emergency responders arrived within minutes, but they faced an impossible situation. The leaking propane created a massive hazmat zone. One spark could trigger an explosion that would kill everyone within hundreds of yards. The highway was immediately closed in both directions. Search and rescue divers suited up to find Richard, but the propane gas made their job deadly dangerous. Underwater visibility was nearly zero. The cab was pinned beneath the weight of the trailer, and somewhere in that submerged metal tomb was a human being who might still be alive. Hour after hour passed with no sign of Richard. The propane continued to leak. The gas needed time to dissipate before it would be safe to bring in heavy recovery equipment. Highway 189 remained completely closed. Travelers were stranded for miles in both directions. As darkness fell, the search was suspended. It was simply too dangerous to continue. The divers retreated. The recovery crews pulled back. Richard Bowman spent his final night alone at the bottom of Deer Creek Reservoir. Tuesday morning brought new hope and renewed horror. Hazmat teams determined that enough propane had vented from the damaged tank to make recovery operations possible. Massive cranes were brought in. Equipment worth millions of dollars was positioned around the crash site. The recovery operation began at noon. Heavy chains were attached to the submerged cab. Winches strained against the weight of waterlogged metal. Slowly, impossibly, the cab began to rise from the depths. Water poured from every opening as the truck emerged. Emergency responders held their breath, hoping against hope that Richard had somehow survived, that maybe he'd found an air pocket, that maybe this story would have a different ending. But when the cab broke the surface, their worst fears were confirmed. Richard Bowman was found inside, deceased. He'd been trapped underwater for nearly 20 hours. The mountain lakes of Utah are brutally cold, even in late spring. Hypothermia would have claimed him within minutes, even if he'd survived the initial impact. The Utah Highway Patrol immediately launched a full investigation. How does an experienced driver lose control on a straight section of highway? Richard had millions of miles of driving experience. He'd hauled dangerous cargo through much worse conditions. He knew the risks of driving with propane. Some investigators theorized mechanical failure, maybe a tire blowout, maybe brake problems, maybe a steering malfunction that sent the truck careening off the road. But the evidence was inconclusive. The truck had been underwater too long. Salt and minerals from the reservoir had contaminated potential evidence. Others wondered about medical issues. Had Richard suffered a heart attack, a stroke, some kind of sudden medical emergency that left him unable to control the massive vehicle? But the coroner's examination couldn't determine if any medical event had occurred before the crash. The most disturbing possibility was driver error. Maybe Richard had become distracted. Maybe he'd fallen asleep at the wheel. Maybe he'd simply misjudged the curve and lost control. But those who knew him rejected this explanation. Richard was a consummate professional. He didn't make rookie mistakes. The official investigation concluded that the cause of the crash was unknown. The Utah Department of Public Safety filed their report and closed the case. But questions lingered in the minds of everyone who knew Richard Bowman. Highway 189 reopened Tuesday evening, nearly 24 hours after the crash. Traffic began flowing again past the spot where Richard had died. Most drivers had no idea they were passing the scene of such a tragedy. No idea that a fellow professional had lost his life in these frigid waters. The environmental cleanup took weeks. Propane gas is heavier than air. It settles in low areas and can remain dangerous for extended periods. Diesel fuel from the truck's tanks had also leaked into the pristine reservoir. Specialized crews worked around the clock to minimize the ecological damage. For Richard's family, the investigation's conclusions brought no comfort. Knowing that their loved one had died didn't explain why he had died. The randomness of the tragedy made it even more difficult to accept. Other truck drivers began avoiding Highway 189 whenever possible. Word spread through the professional driving community that something wasn't right about that stretch of road. Some reported feeling uneasy when they passed mile marker 24. Others claimed they could still smell propane in the air. Richard Bowman's crash highlighted the extreme dangers that professional drivers face every day. Hauling hazardous materials is one of the most dangerous jobs in America. These drivers transport the chemicals, fuels, and gases that keep our society functioning. But they do so knowing that one mistake could be their last. The guardrails along Highway 189 were reinforced after Richard's crash. New warning signs were installed. Additional lighting was added to help drivers navigate the treacherous curves. But these improvements came too late for Richard Bowman. His death serves as a grim reminder that America's highways can be unforgiving, that even experienced professionals can find themselves in situations beyond their control. that sometimes a routine drive becomes a journey into disaster. The next time you see a truck hauling hazardous materials, remember Richard Bowman. Remember that the driver behind the wheel is risking his life to deliver the products you depend on. Remember that professional driving is one of America's most dangerous occupations, and remember that Highway 189 still cuts through the Utah mountains, still offers those breathtaking views of Deer Creek Reservoir, but now those waters hold more than mountain scenery. They hold the memory of a 62-year-old truck driver who never made it home, a man who died doing the job he'd done safely for decades, a professional who discovered that sometimes experience isn't enough to survive America's deadliest highways. Richard Bowman's truck disappeared beneath the surface on a Monday evening in May, but his story serves as a warning to every driver who travels these mountain roads. Some journeys end in destinations you never planned to reach, and some roads lead to places from which there is no return. What you're about to hear happened on a routine Wednesday in April 2025. This is the true story of a 74-year-old man who vanished while driving California's treacherous coastal highways. This case involved multiple law enforcement agencies, Coast Guard helicopters, and the most advanced vehicle tracking technology available. Every detail has been verified through official California Highway Patrol reports, Sheriff's Department documentation, and emergency response records. This is declassified horror, bringing you documented cases where modern technology couldn't prevent an ancient tragedy. Clifford Souza was a 74-year-old resident of Gualala, California, a small coastal community perched on the rugged cliffs of Mendocino County. For decades, Clifford had navigated the winding mountain roads that connect California's remote coastal towns to the civilized world beyond. Highway 1 is one of America's most beautiful drives. It hugs the Pacific coastline for hundreds of miles. Tourists travel from around the world to experience its breathtaking views, but locals know the truth about this scenic highway. It's also one of the most dangerous roads in the United States. On April 23, 2025, Clifford planned what should have been a routine trip. He was driving from his home in Gualala to Martinez, California, a distance of approximately 120 miles. For most people, this would be a simple 3-hour drive, but Highway 1 doesn't allow for simple anything. The route from Gualala to Martinez requires navigating some of the most challenging terrain in California, hairpin turns that cling to 1,000-foot cliffs, fog banks that roll in without warning, reducing visibility to mere feet, sections of road so narrow that two vehicles can barely pass each other safely. Clifford was driving his gray 2021 Ford Ranger pickup truck, a reliable vehicle equipped with the latest safety features and GPS tracking technology. He'd made this trip many times before. He knew every curve, every potential hazard, every place where the road demanded complete attention. Wednesday morning, April 23rd, Clifford said goodbye to his family and began his journey to Martinez. The weather was clear. Road conditions were good. Nothing suggested that this trip would be any different from the dozens of others he'd completed safely. He was expected to return to Gualala that same evening. Clifford was the type of person who kept his word. He always arrived when he said he would. His family had no reason to worry when he left that morning. But Wednesday evening came and went. Clifford didn't return home. His family waited. Maybe he'd decided to stay overnight in Martinez. Maybe he'd encountered unexpected delays. Maybe he'd simply lost track of time. But as the hours passed, their concern grew into genuine fear. Clifford wasn't the type to disappear without explanation. He always checked in. He always let people know if his plans had changed. At 4:15 in the morning on Thursday, April 24th, the Mendocino County Sheriff's Office received a missing person report. Clifford Souza had vanished somewhere between Gualala and Martinez, or somewhere on the long, dangerous road back home. Sheriff's deputies immediately began utilizing every tool available to modern law enforcement. They accessed Clifford's cell phone records. They tracked his digital footprint. They searched for any electronic evidence that might reveal his location. The investigation revealed something both helpful and deeply disturbing. Clifford's 2021 Ford Ranger was equipped with Ford Pass technology. This system allows authorized users to track a vehicle's location, status, and activity in real time. It's designed to help owners monitor their vehicles and assist law enforcement in exactly this type of situation. The Ford Pass data showed that Clifford's truck had been active in Sonoma County. This was encouraging news. It meant his vehicle had made it past some of the most dangerous sections of Highway 1. But it also raised new questions. Why had Clifford's journey taken him through Sonoma County? And why had all tracking activity suddenly stopped? The Sonoma County Sheriff's Office was immediately notified. A BOLO alert was issued to all neighboring counties. Every law enforcement officer in Northern California was instructed to watch for Clifford's gray Ford Ranger, license plate number 77443E3. But searching for one vehicle across thousands of square miles of rugged terrain is like looking for a needle in a haystack. California's coastal region is vast, remote, filled with countless backroads, hidden valleys, and inaccessible canyons where a vehicle could disappear completely. The California Highway Patrol deployed a helicopter to search the coastal Highway 1 corridor. They flew from Bodega Bay in Sonoma County all the way north to Gualala in Mendocino County. Experienced pilots searched every cliff edge, every ravine, every place where a vehicle might have gone off the road. The aerial search revealed nothing. No sign of Clifford's truck, no indication of where he might have left the main highway. The Pacific coastline kept its secrets hidden beneath layers of fog and dense forest canopy. The United States Coast Guard joined the search effort. Their helicopters are equipped with the most advanced search and rescue technology available. Thermal imaging cameras that can detect heat signatures through heavy vegetation. Radar systems that can spot metallic objects from miles away. But even the Coast Guard's sophisticated equipment found nothing. As nightfall approached on Thursday, April 24th, the search was suspended. Clifford Souza and his gray Ford Ranger had simply vanished into the Northern California wilderness. Friday brought renewed search efforts. Additional resources were deployed. Search and rescue teams combed remote areas where cell phone and GPS signals might not penetrate. Volunteers joined the effort, searching hiking trails and back roads that official vehicles couldn't access. The California Highway Patrol issued a silver alert. This statewide notification system is designed to help locate missing senior citizens who may be suffering from cognitive impairment or other health issues. Clifford's photograph and vehicle description were broadcast across multiple counties. Local news stations picked up the story. Clifford's picture appeared on television screens throughout Northern California. Social media groups shared his information. Thousands of people were watching for any sign of the missing 74-year-old man. But Friday's search efforts proved as fruitless as Thursday's. Clifford seemed to have disappeared completely. No witnesses came forward. No credible sightings were reported. The most advanced technology available to law enforcement had failed to locate one elderly man in a gray pickup truck. Friday night, Clifford's family faced a terrible reality. Their loved one had been missing for more than 48 hours. In cases involving elderly drivers on dangerous roads, time is critical. Every hour that passes reduces the chances of a positive outcome. Sleep came hard for everyone involved in the search. Rescue workers, family members, and law enforcement officers all knew that Saturday might bring the discovery they were hoping for, or the discovery they were dreading. Saturday morning, April 26th, brought clear skies and renewed determination. Search teams prepared for another day of systematic searching. Helicopters were fueled and ready. Dive teams stood by in case water searches became necessary. Then at 2:31 in the afternoon, everything changed. The California Highway Patrol received a call that would end the search but begin a far more troubling mystery. A member of the public reported a submerged vehicle in the Russian River off Highway 1, north of Highway 116. The location was near the small coastal town of Jenner in Sonoma County. The caller couldn't see details, but something large and metallic was clearly visible beneath the water's surface. CHP officers responded immediately. When they arrived at the scene, their worst fears were confirmed. A gray pickup truck was submerged in the Russian River. The vehicle matched the description of Clifford Souza's missing Ford Ranger. California State Parks divers were called to the scene. These professionals are trained to handle underwater recoveries in swift-moving water. The Russian River can be deceptively dangerous, especially during spring runoff, when water levels are high and currents are strong. The divers worked carefully to approach the submerged vehicle. Underwater visibility in the river was poor. The truck had been submerged long enough for silt and debris to settle around it. Every movement had to be calculated to avoid disturbing potential evidence. Inside the truck's cab, the divers made the discovery that everyone had feared but hoped they wouldn't find. Clifford Souza's body was inside, still secured by his seatbelt. He had not survived the plunge into the Russian River. Sonoma County Sheriff's deputies and Clifford's family confirmed the identification. The 3-day search for a missing person had become a death investigation. The focus shifted from rescue to understanding how and why this tragedy had occurred. The preliminary investigation revealed basic facts but raised disturbing questions.
Clifford's Ford Ranger had been traveling on Highway 1 when it veered off the roadway and into the Russian River. This much was clear from the physical evidence at the scene, but everything else about the crash remained mysterious. When had it occurred? Why had Clifford's truck left the roadway? Had he suffered a medical emergency? Had he swerved to avoid something? Had mechanical failure caused him to lose control? The location of the crash added another layer of mystery. Highway 1 near Jenna is not the most direct route between Guadalajara and Martinez. Clifford would have had to deviate from the main highway to end up at this particular spot. But why would an experienced driver familiar with these roads choose this route? The timing of the crash was equally puzzling. Clifford had been missing since Wednesday evening. His truck was found on Saturday afternoon, but investigators couldn't determine exactly when the vehicle had entered the water. Had it happened immediately after he left Martinez? Had he been trapped in the river for 3 entire days? The advanced technology that had tracked Clifford's movements suddenly seemed inadequate. The Ford Pass system showed his truck had been in Sonoma County, but it couldn't explain why he'd driven to this specific location. Cell phone records confirmed his presence in the area, but provided no insight into his final moments. Local residents were shocked by the discovery. Many of them drove past this section of Highway 1 regularly. Some had even participated in the search efforts. The idea that Clifford had been so close all along was deeply unsettling. The Russian River near Jenna is a popular recreation area. Kayakers, fishermen, and tourists frequent this stretch of water year-round. How had a submerged pickup truck remained unnoticed for potentially 3 days? Had it been hidden by high water levels? Had poor visibility prevented earlier detection? The crash reconstruction team began the painstaking process of analyzing the physical evidence. Skid marks on the roadway, damage to guardrails or vegetation, the truck's final position in the water. Every detail would be examined to understand the sequence of events that led to Clifford's death. But some questions might never be answered. Clifford Souza took his final secrets with him when he died. The moments before his truck left the roadway remained known only to him. The thoughts and circumstances that led to this tragedy would forever remain a mystery. The recovery operation took several hours. Removing a waterlogged pickup truck from a river requires specialized equipment and careful coordination. Environmental concerns had to be addressed. Any fuel or automotive fluids that had leaked into the water needed to be contained and cleaned up. Clifford's family faced the devastating reality that their loved one would not be coming home. The man who had safely navigated California's dangerous highways for decades had finally encountered a situation he couldn't survive. The roads that had been his domain for so many years had claimed his life. Highway 1 was temporarily closed while investigators documented the scene. Traffic was detoured around the crash site. Most drivers passing through had no idea they were witnessing the conclusion of a 3-day mystery that had mobilized dozens of law enforcement officers and search teams. The investigation into Clifford's death would continue for weeks. Autopsy results would be analyzed. Mechanical inspections of his truck would be conducted. Weather conditions on Wednesday evening would be reviewed. Every possible factor that might have contributed to the crash would be examined. But for Clifford's family and friends, the investigation's findings would matter less than the simple, brutal fact of his death. A routine trip to Martinez had become a journey from which he would never return. A familiar highway had transformed into a deadly trap. The case highlighted the unique dangers faced by elderly drivers on California's remote highways. Advanced age brings increased risks of medical emergencies, slower reaction times, and reduced ability to recover from dangerous situations. But Clifford had been an experienced driver who knew these roads intimately. The technology that was supposed to keep him safe had ultimately failed. GPS tracking could show where he'd been but couldn't prevent the crash. Cell phone towers could pinpoint his location but couldn't summon help in time. Modern safety features couldn't overcome the fundamental physics of a heavy vehicle leaving the roadway at speed. Search and rescue teams returned to their normal duties, knowing they had done everything possible to find Clifford quickly. The Coast Guard pilots returned to their patrols of the Pacific. The CHP helicopter crews resumed their routine surveillance flights. But everyone involved would remember the elderly man who had vanished into the coastal fog. California Highway Patrol investigators closed their active search but left the investigation open pending further developments. The cause of the crash remained officially undetermined. Without witnesses or clear physical evidence, the exact sequence of events would likely never be known. The Russian River continued flowing toward the Pacific Ocean, carrying away the last traces of the tragedy that had occurred on its banks. Highway 1 remained open to traffic, beckoning new travelers with its promise of scenic beauty and coastal adventure. But for those who knew Clifford Souza's story, this stretch of road would forever be marked by loss. His death serves as a stark reminder that California's coastal highways can be unforgiving, that even experienced drivers can find themselves in situations beyond their control, that sometimes the most beautiful roads in America are also the most deadly. The next time you're driving Highway 1 along the California coast, remember Clifford Souza. Remember that 74 years of life experience couldn't prevent one moment of catastrophic loss of control. Remember that the Russian River holds more than water and memories. And remember that some journeys end in places you never intended to go. Some roads lead to destinations from which there is no return.
What you're about to hear happened on a seemingly ordinary Friday morning in April 2024. This is the documented account of a 36-year-old father who left for work and vanished into the murky waters of Pennsylvania's industrial heartland. This case involved multiple police departments, specialized dive teams, and cutting-edge cell tower technology. Every detail has been verified through official Brighton Township police reports, Allegheny County investigation files, and emergency response documentation. This is declassified horror, bringing you true stories where modern technology reveals more questions than answers. Brian Posch was 36 years old, a devoted husband to his wife Alana and father to their one-year-old daughter Mila. He lived in Brighton Township, Pennsylvania, in the heart of Beaver County. This is blue-collar America, where men like Brian work construction jobs that build the infrastructure of modern society. Brian was the kind of man who never missed work, reliable, dependable, the type of employee that foremen count on to show up every day, no matter the weather or circumstances. His co-workers knew they could depend on him. His family knew he would always provide for them. Friday, April 5, 2024, began like every other workday for Brian. He kissed his wife goodbye. He hugged his baby daughter. He climbed into his white Ford Super Duty work truck and headed south on Route 51 toward Jefferson Hills. His job site was waiting. His crew was counting on him. The drive from Brighton Township to Jefferson Hills is a familiar route for thousands of Pennsylvania workers. It follows the industrial corridors that have defined this region for over a century, past steel mills that once powered America's economy, through valleys carved by rivers that still carry the legacy of heavy industry. Brian had made this commute countless times before. He knew every traffic light, every construction zone, every potential delay that could slow him down. The route was approximately 20 miles of mostly highway driving. On a clear Friday morning, it should have taken him less than 30 minutes. But Brian Posch never arrived at his construction site. When 11 o'clock came and went without any sign of Brian, his foreman grew concerned. Construction work starts early. Workers are expected to be on site and ready to begin by 7 or 8 in the morning. By 11, Brian should have been working for hours. Phone calls to Brian's cell phone went straight to voicemail. Text messages received no response. This was completely unlike the reliable worker that everyone knew Brian to be. Something was terribly wrong. His wife Alana became increasingly worried as the morning progressed. Brian always answered his phone. He always responded to messages. Even when he was busy at work, he would send a quick text to let her know everything was okay. By Friday afternoon, Alana's concern had escalated to genuine fear. She contacted the Brighton Township Police Department to report her husband missing. The officer who took her call immediately recognized the urgency of the situation. A reliable family man doesn't simply vanish without explanation. The initial investigation focused on Brian's planned route to work. Police officers drove every mile of highway between Brighton Township and Jefferson Hills. They checked with other motorists. They reviewed traffic camera footage. They contacted hospitals in case Brian had been in an accident. But there was no sign of Brian Posch or his white Ford Super Duty anywhere along his normal commute. It was as if he had simply evaporated somewhere between home and work. The Brighton Township Police Department quickly escalated the case. They contacted the Pennsylvania State Police. They issued a BOLO alert to neighboring jurisdictions. They began utilizing every resource available to find a missing person in Pennsylvania's complex network of highways and industrial areas. The breakthrough came from technology that most people take for granted: cell phone tower data. Every mobile phone constantly communicates with nearby towers, creating a digital trail that can be followed even when the phone itself is turned off or destroyed. Brian's cell phone records revealed something both promising and deeply troubling. His phone had last communicated with a tower in Elizabeth Township, not Jefferson Hills. This meant Brian had deviated from his normal route to work. But why? And where had he gone? Elizabeth Township is located along the Monongahela River, one of Pennsylvania's major waterways. The river flows northwest through the heart of the state's industrial region, eventually joining the Allegheny River to form the Ohio River at Pittsburgh. It's a working river, lined with barge terminals, industrial facilities, and small communities that depend on water transportation. The cell tower data indicated that Brian's phone had last pinged somewhere within the Elizabeth Township area. But this was a vast search zone. The township covers multiple square miles of both land and water. Finding one person and one vehicle in such a large area would require a massive coordinated effort. Elizabeth Township Police and Fire Rescue were called in to assist with the search. Their local knowledge of the area would be crucial to understanding where Brian might have gone and why his phone had stopped communicating from this location. The decision to search the Monongahela River came from careful analysis of the cell tower data. The last ping from Brian's phone had originated from a tower whose coverage area included a significant stretch of the river. If Brian's truck had somehow ended up in the water, his phone would have stopped working immediately. Dive teams were assembled and deployed to search the river bottom near Elizabeth Township. The Monongahela River can be deceptively dangerous, especially in early spring when water levels are high and currents are strong. Underwater visibility is often poor due to industrial runoff and natural sediment. The initial dive searches found nothing. The river bottom near Elizabeth Township is cluttered with decades of industrial debris. Pieces of machinery, construction materials, and other metal objects make it difficult to distinguish between junk and potential evidence. Friday night passed with no sign of Brian. His family endured a sleepless night, hoping for news but fearing the worst. The construction crew that Brian was supposed to join worked their shift knowing that one of their own was missing somewhere in the Pennsylvania wilderness. Saturday brought expanded search efforts. Additional dive teams were brought in from neighboring counties. Boats equipped with sonar scanning equipment began systematic searches of the river bottom. Helicopter overflights searched the shoreline for any sign of Brian's white Ford truck, but Saturday's searches proved as fruitless as Friday's efforts. The Monongahela River kept its secrets hidden beneath layers of dark water and river bottom sediment. Brian Posch remained missing, and his family remained trapped in a nightmare of uncertainty. Sunday brought more of the same. Dive teams worked in rotation to avoid exhaustion. Sonar operators methodically scanned grid patterns across the river bottom. Volunteers walked the shoreline looking for any clue that might indicate where Brian had entered the water. The search attracted attention from local media outlets. Brian's photograph appeared on television news broadcasts throughout the Pittsburgh area. Social media posts shared his picture and the details of his disappearance. Thousands of people became aware that a father and husband had vanished somewhere in their community. Monday, April 8th brought the first significant development in the case. Dive teams using advanced sonar equipment detected a large metal mass approximately 50 yards from the Elizabeth Township shore. The object was too large to be typical river debris. It had the size and shape that could potentially be a submerged vehicle. But the Monongahela River's treacherous underwater conditions prevented immediate investigation. Strong currents and poor visibility made it dangerous for divers to approach the object. The recovery would have to wait until Tuesday, when specialized equipment could be brought to the scene. Monday night was another sleepless ordeal for Brian's family. The discovery of a large metal object offered hope that their loved one might finally be found, but it also raised the terrifying possibility that he was dead. The waiting was almost unbearable. Tuesday morning, April 9th, brought clear skies and calm water conditions. Heavy recovery equipment was positioned along the Elizabeth Township riverbank. Specialized dive teams prepared for what could be the most important recovery operation of their careers. The process of bringing the submerged object to the surface took several hours. Heavy chains had to be attached underwater. Winches strained against the weight of waterlogged metal. Emergency crews stood by, not knowing what they would find when the object broke the surface. When the metal mass finally emerged from the Monongahela River, everyone's worst fears were confirmed. It was indeed a white Ford Super Duty truck, the same type of vehicle that Brian Posch had been driving when he disappeared 4 days earlier. But the discovery of the truck only marked the beginning of a more heartbreaking revelation. Brian's body was found inside the cab, still secured by his seatbelt. The man who had left home on Friday morning to provide for his family would never return to them. The recovery of Brian's body ended the search, but began a far more complex investigation. How had his truck ended up in the Monongahela River? Why had he deviated from his normal route to work? What had happened in those final moments before his vehicle entered the water? Initial examination of the scene revealed no obvious signs of foul play. There were no apparent mechanical failures that might have caused Brian to lose control of his truck. The investigation would need to rely on forensic analysis and accident reconstruction to determine what had happened. The Allegheny County Medical Examiner's Office took custody of Brian's body for autopsy. The examination would determine the exact cause of death and potentially provide clues about how the accident had occurred. But some questions might never be answered.
The news of Brian's death devastated his family and shocked the Brighton Township community. A GoFundMe campaign was established to help his wife Alana and daughter Mila cope with the sudden loss of their primary income provider. The fundraising goal was quickly exceeded as neighbors and strangers donated to help the grieving family, but Brian's death would continue to cause pain for his family in ways they never anticipated. Months after his body was recovered, false social media posts began circulating claiming that Brian was still missing and alive. These cruel hoaxes forced his family to relive their grief while battling misinformation. The fake posts spread rapidly across Facebook groups and individual user accounts. Some claimed that Brian had just disappeared yesterday morning and that his truck had been found with his baby daughter inside. Others suggested that a silver alert had been issued for someone named Keith who was in extreme danger. These false posts contained obvious errors and inconsistencies that should have made their fraudulent nature apparent. But social media users shared them anyway, either out of genuine desire to help or simple carelessness with unverified information. Brian's family members were forced to repeatedly explain that their loved one was dead, not missing. They had to watch strangers share false hope about a man who had been buried months earlier. The pain of losing Brian was compounded by the cruelty of people who used his death for unknown purposes. The official investigation into Brian's death concluded that there was no evidence of foul play. The exact circumstances that led to his truck entering the Monongahela River remained undetermined. Whether he had suffered a medical emergency, experienced mechanical failure, or simply made a tragic error in judgment would likely never be known. The Pennsylvania Department of Transportation reviewed the area where Brian's truck had entered the water. Safety improvements were considered to prevent similar accidents in the future, but these measures came too late to save Brian Posch. His death highlighted the inherent dangers of Pennsylvania's industrial transportation network. Rivers that flow through urban and industrial areas can become deadly traps for drivers who make even small mistakes. The Monongahela River has claimed other lives over the decades, and it will likely claim more in the future. The construction crew that Brian was supposed to join on April 5th continued their work without him, but his absence was felt every day. Equipment operators and laborers who had worked alongside him for years struggled to accept that their reliable colleague would never return to the job site. Elizabeth Township returned to its normal routines, but residents who had witnessed the recovery operation would never forget the sight of that white truck emerging from the river. The image of Brian's final resting place beneath the dark water would haunt everyone who had participated in the search. The cell tower technology that had led investigators to Brian's location proved both a blessing and a curse. It had enabled them to find his body and provide closure to his family, but it had also revealed how quickly a routine commute could become a deadly disaster in America's industrial heartland. Brian Posch's story serves as a stark reminder that tragedy can strike anyone, anywhere, at any time. A devoted father and husband can leave for work one morning and never return home. The roads we travel every day can become the sites of our final journeys. The next time you're driving past Pennsylvania's rivers and industrial areas, remember Brian Posch. Remember that beneath those murky waters lie the remains of dreams and families destroyed by circumstances that may never be fully understood. And remember that the Monongahela River continues to flow through the heart of Pennsylvania's working communities. It carries barges loaded with coal and steel. It supports the industries that built America, but it also holds the memories of those who never made it safely to their destinations. Brian Posch left home on a Friday morning to build something for his community. Instead, he became part of the river's dark history. His truck disappeared beneath the surface, but his story reminds us that some journeys end in places we never planned to go. The industrial rivers of America keep flowing, but they also keep secrets, and sometimes those secrets take 4 days to surface.
What you're about to hear is a story that spans nearly 2 years and hundreds of square miles of America's most beautiful and treacherous landscape. This is the documented account of a 54-year-old man who vanished into the vast wilderness of the Colorado Plateau and remained hidden until nature itself revealed his final resting place. This case involved multiple state jurisdictions, National Park Service resources, and the ever-changing water levels of one of America's largest reservoirs. Every detail has been verified through official Kane County Sheriff reports, Page Police Department documentation, and National Park Service records. This is declassified horror, bringing you true stories where the American Southwest's stunning beauty conceals its deadliest secrets. Dennis Keith Dillinger was 54 years old, a man who loved the outdoors with a passion that defined his entire existence. He lived in Page, Arizona, a small town perched on the edge of Glen Canyon, gateway to some of the most spectacular and dangerous terrain in the American West. Lake Powell stretched endlessly before Dennis's hometown. This massive reservoir, created by the Glen Canyon Dam, spans nearly 200 miles of the Colorado River. When full, it contains enough water to cover the entire state of Pennsylvania to a depth of 1 foot. But Lake Powell is never truly full anymore. For over 2 decades, the American Southwest has been gripped by an unprecedented drought. Lake Powell's water levels have dropped dramatically, revealing landscapes that have been submerged for generations. Ancient rock formations emerge like ghosts from the depths, and sometimes these receding waters reveal secrets that were never meant to be found. Dennis knew Lake Powell better than most people know their own neighborhoods. He'd spent countless hours exploring its hidden canyons, remote beaches, and towering red rock formations. The lake was his sanctuary, the place where he found peace in an increasingly chaotic world. December 1st, 2023 began as an ordinary day for Dennis. He was in Kanab, Utah, a small town about an hour's drive from his home in Page. Kanab sits at the junction of several major highways that connect the scattered communities of the Colorado Plateau. It's a place where travelers stop for supplies before venturing into the wilderness. Dennis made a routine stop at the Family Dollar store on Kanab's Main Street. Security cameras captured him making his purchase. Store employees saw him leave the building and walk toward his vehicle. It was the last confirmed sighting of Dennis Keith Dillinger alive. He was driving his 1991 Dodge Dakota pickup truck, silver gray in color, well maintained despite its age. Dennis treated that truck like a trusted companion. It had carried him safely through thousands of miles of desert highways and backcountry roads. But December 1st, 2023, would be different. Dennis would never make it home to Page. His truck would never again be seen traveling the familiar highways between Kanab and Lake Powell. He had simply vanished into the vast expanse of the American Southwest. When Dennis failed to return home, his family knew immediately that something was wrong. He wasn't the type of person to disappear without explanation. He always stayed in contact. He always let people know where he was going and when he expected to return. The Page Police Department opened a missing person investigation. In this part of the country, missing person cases are unfortunately common. The desert can be unforgiving to those who become lost or experience vehicle problems, but Dennis was an experienced outdoorsman. He knew the risks and how to avoid them. The initial search focused on the highway corridor between Kanab and Page. This route crosses some of the most remote and dangerous terrain in the United States. Steep canyons where a vehicle could disappear completely, winding mountain roads where one mistake could be fatal, desert areas where a stranded motorist could die of exposure within hours. Search and rescue teams combed every mile of the possible routes Dennis might have taken. Helicopters flew grid patterns across the high desert. Ground teams checked every canyon, every wash, every place where a vehicle might have gone off the road. But the search revealed nothing. No sign of Dennis or his Dodge Dakota. No skid marks, no debris, no indication of where he might have left the main highway. It was as if he had simply evaporated in the desert air. The Page Police Department expanded their investigation. They checked with hospitals throughout the region. They contacted law enforcement agencies in neighboring states. They issued alerts to truckers and other professional drivers who regularly travel the Southwest's highway network. Still nothing. Dennis Keith Dillinger had become another missing person statistic in a region where people disappear regularly and are never found. Months passed with no new leads. The active search was scaled back, but the case remained open. Dennis's family never gave up hope, but they began to accept the possibility that they might never learn what had happened to their loved one. A Facebook page was created to keep Dennis's case in the public eye. His photograph was shared thousands of times across social media platforms. Local news outlets periodically ran stories about the missing outdoorsman, but no credible sightings were reported. Seasons changed in the Colorado Plateau. The brutal summer heat of 2024 gave way to autumn's cooler temperatures. Winter brought snow to the higher elevations. Spring returned with its promise of renewal, but Dennis remained missing. Throughout 2024 and into 2025, Lake Powell's water levels continued to drop. The ongoing drought showed no signs of ending. Reservoirs throughout the Southwest were reaching critically low levels. Ancient landscapes continued to emerge from the receding waters. Labor Day weekend 2025 brought thousands of visitors to Lake Powell. Despite the low water levels, the reservoir remained a popular destination for boating, camping, and water sports. Families from across the country came to experience the stunning beauty of Glen Canyon National Recreation Area. Lone Rock Beach is one of Lake Powell's most popular recreation areas.
The massive sandstone monolith that gives the beach its name rises dramatically from the water's edge. Visitors come to camp, launch boats, and enjoy some of the most spectacular scenery in the American West. But Labor Day weekend 2025 would bring a discovery that no one wanted to make. Visitors recreating on Lone Rock Beach noticed something unusual in the water, an object that looked artificial, something that shouldn't be there. As they moved closer to investigate, the horrible truth became apparent. It was a vehicle, submerged in Lake Powell's crystal-clear water, partially visible due to the reservoir's dramatically reduced water levels. The discovery was immediately reported to authorities. National Park Service personnel responded to the scene within hours. What they found would finally answer questions that had haunted Dennis's family for nearly 2 years. The submerged vehicle was indeed a pickup truck. The make, model, and color matched the description of Dennis Dillinger's missing Dodge Dakota, but confirming the vehicle's identity would require accessing its vehicle identification number. National Park Service divers entered Lake Powell's cold, clear water to examine the submerged truck. Despite being underwater for nearly 2 years, the vehicle's VIN was still visible on the dashboard. A record search quickly confirmed everyone's worst fears. The truck belonged to Dennis Keith Dillinger, the missing Arizona man who had vanished from Kanab in December 2023. His truck had been resting on the bottom of Lake Powell for all those months while search teams scoured the desert looking for him. But the discovery of Dennis's truck was only the beginning of a more heartbreaking revelation. Human remains were found inside the vehicle. Someone had been trapped in that truck when it entered Lake Powell's waters, someone who had never escaped. The recovery operation required specialized equipment and careful coordination. Removing a vehicle from Lake Powell's depths is a complex undertaking that must be done without disturbing potential evidence or damaging the pristine environment of Glen Canyon National Recreation Area. On Wednesday, September 3, 2025, Dennis's truck was finally brought to the surface. It emerged from Lake Powell like a ghost from the past, carrying secrets that had remained hidden for nearly 2 years. Water poured from every opening as the Dodge Dakota was lifted onto the shore. The human remains found inside the truck were carefully transported to the Utah State Medical Examiner's office. While official identification would take time, everyone involved in the recovery operation understood the likely identity of the deceased. Dennis Keith Dillinger had finally been found. The discovery brought both relief and renewed anguish to Dennis's family. After nearly 2 years of uncertainty, they finally had answers about what had happened to their loved one. But those answers came with the devastating confirmation that Dennis would never be coming home. His sister, Sherry Mersinger, spoke publicly about the discovery. She revealed that the family had always suspected Dennis might be found at Lake Powell. It was his favorite place, the location where he found peace and tranquility. In some ways, it seemed fitting that his final resting place would be the landscape he loved most. But the discovery also raised troubling questions. How had Dennis's truck ended up in Lake Powell? The reservoir is not visible from the highway between Kanab and Page. Dennis would have had to deliberately drive to Lone Rock Beach. But why? And what had happened in those final moments before his truck entered the water? Lake Powell's dramatically reduced water levels had played a crucial role in the discovery. When Dennis's truck had entered the water in December 2023, it had been completely submerged. No one could have seen it from the surface, but nearly 2 years of drought had lowered the water level enough to make the vehicle visible. The irony was not lost on investigators. The same drought conditions that had made the Southwest's water crisis headline news had also revealed the location of a missing person who might otherwise never have been found. Nature itself had provided the key to solving Dennis's disappearance. The investigation into how Dennis's truck had ended up in Lake Powell continued. Accident reconstruction specialists would examine every detail of the vehicle's condition and position. The Utah State Medical Examiner would determine the exact cause of death and potentially provide clues about Dennis's final moments. But some questions might never be answered. Had Dennis suffered a medical emergency while driving? Had mechanical failure caused him to lose control of his truck? Had he deliberately driven to Lake Powell for reasons known only to himself? The truth died with Dennis in the cold, clear waters of the reservoir. The recovery operation attracted attention from across the Southwest. Dennis's case had been followed by thousands of people who were invested in finding answers about his disappearance. The discovery of his truck provided closure, but it also highlighted the dangers faced by those who venture into America's remote wilderness areas. Lake Powell returned to its normal recreational activities after the recovery operation concluded. Visitors continued to enjoy boating, swimming, and camping along its shores, but those who had witnessed the emergence of Dennis's truck would never forget the sight of that vehicle breaking the surface after nearly 2 years underwater. The ongoing drought conditions meant that Lake Powell's water levels would likely continue to drop. Who knew what other secrets might be revealed as more of the reservoir's bottom became visible? How many other missing persons cases might be solved by the receding waters? Glen Canyon National Recreation Area officials reminded visitors about the importance of water safety and staying on designated roads and beaches. The discovery of Dennis's truck served as a stark reminder that even experienced outdoorsmen can find themselves in situations they cannot survive. Dennis's family began planning for his final burial. After nearly 2 years of uncertainty, they could finally lay their loved one to rest. The man who had found peace at Lake Powell would be remembered for his love of the outdoors and his adventurous spirit. The Facebook page dedicated to Dennis's case was updated with news of his discovery. Thousands of people who had shared his missing person posts over the past 2 years learned that the search was finally over. The outpouring of support for his family demonstrated the power of social media to keep missing person cases in the public consciousness. Page Police Department closed their active missing person investigation, but continued to assist with the death investigation. After nearly 2 years of searching, Dennis Keith Dillinger had been found. The desert had kept it secret, but the drought had finally forced it to reveal the truth. Local news outlets throughout the Southwest covered the discovery. Dennis's story became a cautionary tale about the hidden dangers of the region's spectacular but unforgiving landscape. His disappearance and discovery highlighted both the beauty and the peril of America's canyon country. The Colorado River continued flowing through Glen Canyon, carrying the precious water that sustains life throughout the American Southwest. But its reduced flow meant that Lake Powell's levels would remain low for the foreseeable future. The drought that had revealed Dennis's location showed no signs of ending. Search and rescue teams throughout the region used Dennis's case as a reminder of how quickly someone can disappear in the vast wilderness of the Colorado Plateau. Even experienced outdoorsmen like Dennis can encounter situations that prove fatal. The desert and its waterways show no mercy to those who make even small mistakes. Dennis Keith Dillinger's story serves as a haunting reminder that America's most beautiful landscapes can also be its most dangerous. The same natural forces that create stunning vistas and peaceful recreation areas can claim lives without warning or explanation. The next time you visit Lake Powell or any of the Southwest's magnificent reservoirs, remember Dennis Dillinger. Remember that beneath those crystal-clear waters may lie secrets that have remained hidden for years. Remember that even the most experienced outdoorsmen can find themselves in situations beyond their control, and remember that the ongoing drought affecting the American Southwest is revealing more than just ancient rock formations and archaeological sites. It's also uncovering the final resting places of those who ventured into the wilderness and never returned home. Dennis found his peace at Lake Powell, but his discovery reminds us that some journeys into America's wild places become permanent destinations. Some adventures end not with triumphant returns home, but with decades of silence beneath the desert's hidden waters. The lake that Dennis loved so much became his final resting place. The drought that has plagued the Southwest for over 2 decades finally revealed his location, and the family that never stopped searching finally received the answers they had waited nearly 2 years to hear. Lake Powell continues to draw visitors from around the world, but now it holds the memory of a man who loved the outdoors so much that he never left. The receding waters that revealed his truck serve as a reminder that nature keeps its secrets until it chooses to give them up.
What you're about to hear happened in the early morning darkness of February 29th, 2024. This is the documented account of a collision between 2 massive tractor-trailers that ended with one man dead and another facing charges for lying about how it all began. This case involved dashboard camera footage that contradicted a driver's sworn statement to police. It demonstrated how modern technology can expose deadly deceptions and ensure that justice reaches those who think they can escape responsibility for their actions. Every detail has been verified through Connecticut State Police reports, dashboard camera evidence, and official court documents. This is declassified horror, bringing you true stories where the truth emerges from digital evidence that lies cannot destroy. Interstate 84 cuts through some of Connecticut's most challenging terrain. It connects the major population centers of the Northeast, carrying thousands of commercial vehicles every day. Massive tractor-trailers hauling everything from consumer goods to industrial equipment thunder along this vital transportation corridor 24 hours a day. The stretch of I-84 near Exit 72 in Union, Connecticut, is particularly demanding for professional drivers. Rolling hills, moderate curves, and changing elevation require constant attention. It's not the most dangerous section of the interstate, but it demands respect from those who travel it regularly. February 29, 2024, was a leap year, an extra day that comes around once every 4 years. For most people, it was simply another day on the calendar. But for two truck drivers heading east on I-84 that night, it would become a date that would change everything forever. James Deruisseaux was 33 years old, a professional truck driver from Hyde Park, Massachusetts. He'd been driving commercial vehicles for years, accumulating thousands of miles of experience on highways throughout New England and beyond. He knew the routes, understood the challenges, and carried the proper commercial driver's license that certified his ability to operate massive vehicles safely. Carlos Vega was 45 years old, a resident of Enfield, Connecticut, and a father of 2 children. He was described by those who knew him as having a larger-than-life personality and a distinctive sense of style. Carlos had spent years building a reputation as a reliable professional driver. He understood the responsibility that came with operating an 80,000-pound vehicle on public highways. At 1:58 in the morning on February 29th, both men were traveling eastbound on I-84 near exit 72. James was driving in the far-right lane. Carlos was traveling in the center lane, maintaining proper spacing and speed for the conditions. Both trucks were equipped with dashboard cameras, devices that would later reveal the deadly truth about what happened next. The weather conditions that night included wind, but nothing that would be considered unusual or dangerous for experienced professional drivers. Visibility was adequate. Road conditions were normal. There was no mechanical justification for what was about to occur. According to the investigation that would follow, James Deruisseaux was traveling at approximately 49 miles per hour. Carlos Vega was maintaining a speed between 60 and 63.5 miles per hour. Both speeds were within legal limits for the stretch of highway where the collision would occur. Then, for reasons that may never be fully understood, James Deruisseaux's tractor-trailer abruptly changed its path of travel. The massive vehicle crossed over the dashed white line separating the right lane from the center lane. More than half of the truck's hood entered the center lane where Carlos Vega was driving. The collision was inevitable. Carlos's tractor-trailer struck the left side of James's truck, creating a shower of sparks visible on the dashboard camera footage. The impact caused both vehicles to lose control and begin a deadly dance of destruction that would end in tragedy. But the collision was only the beginning of the horror. Both tractor-trailers careened off the highway and down an embankment toward Morey Pond, a body of water that sits adjacent to I-84 in this section of Connecticut. The guardrails designed to prevent vehicles from leaving the roadway proved inadequate against the combined force of 2 out-of-control commercial vehicles. James Deruisseaux's blue tractor-trailer struck the guardrail and rolled onto its left side before coming to rest partially submerged in Morey Pond. The impact was severe, but James was able to escape from his cab and make his way to safety on the highway shoulder. Carlos Vega was not so fortunate. His white tractor-trailer rolled onto its roof as it plunged into Morey Pond. The cab became completely submerged beneath the dark water. Carlos was trapped inside, unable to escape from the overturned vehicle as it sank into the pond. Emergency responders arrived at the scene within minutes of the crash. They found James Deruisseaux standing on the right shoulder of I-84, requesting medical attention for possible minor injuries. He was conscious, coherent, and able to provide a statement about what had happened, but reaching Carlos Vega proved impossible. His tractor-trailer's cab was completely underwater, and the vehicle's position made it inaccessible to rescue personnel. Multiple attempts to make contact with the trapped driver yielded no response. The clock was ticking, and everyone at the scene understood the gravity of the situation. Specialized dive teams and heavy recovery equipment were summoned to the scene. The process of extracting Carlos from his submerged tractor-trailer would take precious time that he might not have. Every minute that passed reduced his chances of survival. When Carlos Vega's body was finally recovered from the wreckage, the medical examiner would determine that he had died from drowning with blunt force trauma to the torso. The impact of the collision had likely injured him severely, but it was the water that ultimately claimed his life. Had he been able to escape from the cab, he might have survived. The immediate investigation focused on determining the cause of the collision. James Deruisseaux provided a detailed statement to Connecticut State Police about what he claimed had happened in the moments before the crash. According to James's account, he had been traveling in the far right lane when Carlos's tractor-trailer approached him from the center lane. He claimed that Carlos had lost control and entered his lane of travel, causing the initial collision between the two vehicles. James described how Carlos's truck had then struck the guardrail on the right side of the road before jackknifing and causing a head-on collision in the right lane. Both drivers had lost control, he said, and both vehicles had traveled into the pond on the right side of the road. It was a plausible explanation for a tragic accident. Professional drivers face numerous hazards on America's highways every day.
Mechanical failures, medical emergencies, and driver error can cause even experienced operators to lose control of their vehicles. James's account seemed consistent with the physical evidence at the scene, but modern tractor-trailers are equipped with sophisticated recording devices that capture far more than most people realize. Dashboard cameras document not just what happens in front of a vehicle, but also the vehicle's own movements and actions. These devices create an objective record that cannot be influenced by human memory, bias, or deception. As part of their investigation, Connecticut State Police seized the dashboard camera footage from both tractor-trailers involved in the collision. What they discovered would completely contradict James Deruisseaux's sworn statement about how the crash had occurred. The video evidence showed that James had indeed been traveling in the far right lane, exactly as he had claimed. Carlos Vega had been driving in the center lane, maintaining his position and speed. But what happened next bore no resemblance to James's version of events. The dashboard camera footage clearly showed James's tractor-trailer abruptly changing its path of travel. The massive vehicle crossed over the dashed white line and moved into the right portion of the center lane, where Carlos was driving. More than half of James's hood could be seen within the center lane before the collision occurred. The video evidence from Carlos's dashboard camera corroborated these findings from an external perspective. The footage showed James's truck entering Carlos's lane of travel, not the other way around. It was James who had caused the initial collision by failing to maintain his proper lane position. The Connecticut State Police Collision Analysis and Reconstruction Squad conducted a detailed analysis of the crash using the dashboard camera evidence, physical evidence from the scene, and scientific accident reconstruction techniques. Their findings painted a clear picture of what had actually happened. James Deruisseaux had been traveling at approximately 49 miles per hour when his tractor-trailer abruptly left the right lane and entered the center lane. Carlos Vega had been maintaining a speed between 60 and 63.5 miles per hour in the center lane when James's truck struck his vehicle. The collision caused both vehicles to lose control, but it was James's improper lane change that had initiated the deadly sequence of events. Carlos had been driving properly in his assigned lane when he was struck by a vehicle that should never have entered his path of travel. Blood and toxicology tests conducted on both drivers revealed no evidence of alcohol or drug impairment. This was not a case of intoxicated driving or substance abuse. It appeared to be a case of driver error followed by an attempt to cover up the truth about what had happened. The evidence was overwhelming. Dashboard cameras from both vehicles clearly showed that James Deruisseaux had lied to police about the cause of the collision. His sworn statement claiming that Carlos Vega had caused the crash was directly contradicted by objective video evidence that could not be disputed. On March 13, 2025, more than a year after the crash, James Deruisseaux turned himself in to Connecticut State Police Troop C in Woodland. He was arrested on multiple charges stemming from the deadly collision and his subsequent false statements to investigators. The charges against James included negligent homicide with a motor vehicle, failure to maintain lane, and providing a false statement to police. Each charge carried serious legal consequences that could result in significant prison time if he was convicted. James was released on $50,000 bond and scheduled to appear in Rockville Superior Court on March 26. The legal proceedings would determine whether he would be held criminally responsible for Carlos Vega's death and for lying to investigators about how the collision had occurred. The case highlighted the crucial role that dashboard camera technology now plays in commercial vehicle operations. These devices, originally installed to protect trucking companies from fraudulent insurance claims, have become powerful tools for ensuring accountability and uncovering the truth about highway accidents. For Carlos Vega's family, the arrest brought some measure of justice, but it could never bring back their loved one. The 45-year-old father of two had been doing his job properly when his life was cut short by another driver's negligence and subsequent deception. Carlos's obituary remembered him as a man with a larger-than-life personality who was known for being very stylish. His death left a void in the lives of his children, family members and friends who had depended on his strength and presence. The collision also raised questions about highway safety along I-84 and the adequacy of guardrails designed to prevent vehicles from entering bodies of water adjacent to the roadway. Morey Pond had claimed at least one life, and its proximity to a major interstate highway created ongoing risks for motorists. Interstate 84 was closed for several hours following the collision, while emergency responders worked to clear the scene and recover Carlos's body. The highway closure affected thousands of commuters and commercial drivers who depend on this vital transportation corridor. The trucking industry took notice of the case as an example of how dashboard camera evidence can contradict driver statements and lead to criminal charges. Professional drivers throughout New England and beyond became aware that their actions behind the wheel are being recorded and that lies to investigators can result in additional criminal penalties. James Deruisseaux's case demonstrated that technology has made it increasingly difficult for drivers to escape responsibility for their actions on public highways. Dashboard cameras, event data recorders, and other electronic devices create objective records that cannot be altered or influenced by human bias. The legal proceedings would determine whether James would be convicted of negligent homicide and the other charges filed against him. If found guilty, he could face significant prison time and the permanent loss of his commercial driver's license. For the Connecticut State Police officers who investigated the case, it served as a reminder of the importance of thorough accident reconstruction and the value of modern technology in uncovering the truth. Without the dashboard camera evidence, James's false statement might never have been discovered. The case also highlighted the deadly consequences of improper lane changes on highways where vehicles are traveling at high speeds. A momentary lapse in attention or judgment can result in catastrophic collisions that claim innocent lives. Morey Pond returned to its quiet existence alongside I-84, but it now held the memory of Carlos Vega's final moments. The water that had claimed his life continued to reflect the lights of passing vehicles on the highway above. Commercial vehicles continued to travel past the scene of the collision every day, carrying the goods and materials that keep America's economy functioning. But professional drivers who knew about the case were reminded that their actions behind the wheel have consequences that extend far beyond their own vehicles. The investigation into the Morey Pond collision demonstrated that truth has a way of emerging even when people attempt to hide it. Dashboard cameras had captured objective evidence that no amount of deception could overcome. James Deruisseaux learned that lying to police investigators about a fatal collision would result in additional criminal charges beyond those related to the crash itself. His attempt to shift blame to the victim had been exposed by the very technology designed to document what actually happened. Carlos Vega's death serves as a tragic reminder that professional drivers must maintain constant vigilance and follow all traffic laws. The commercial vehicles they operate are capable of causing devastating damage when they leave their assigned lanes or strike other vehicles. The next time you're traveling on I-84 through Connecticut, remember Carlos Vega. Remember that beneath the waters of Morey Pond lies the memory of a father who was simply doing his job when another driver's negligence claimed his life. And remember that modern technology has made it increasingly difficult for those responsible for highway tragedies to escape accountability. Dashboard cameras and other recording devices ensure that the truth about deadly collisions will eventually emerge, no matter how convincing the lies that attempt to cover it up. The collision that sent 2 tractor-trailers into Morey Pond lasted only seconds, but its consequences will be felt for years as the legal system determines justice for Carlos Vega and accountability for James Deruisseaux. Truth has a way of rising to the surface, just like the dashboard camera evidence that emerged from the wreckage to expose the deadly deception that followed a tragic collision on a leap year night in Connecticut.
What you're about to hear happened on a cold November night in 2023. This is the documented account of a 53-year-old truck driver who vanished from the Iowa countryside while hauling a load of livestock. His disappearance would mystify investigators for 5 months and raise questions that may never be answered. This case involved massive volunteer search efforts, advanced forensic analysis, and over 100,000 acres of Iowa farmland. Every detail has been verified through Iowa Division of Criminal Investigation reports, Sac County Sheriff documentation, and state medical examiner findings. This is declassified horror, bringing you true stories where America's heartland conceals its darkest secrets. David Schultz was 53 years old, a devoted husband and father of twin 10-year-old boys named Joseph and Isaac. He lived in Wall Lake, Iowa, a small farming community where everyone knows their neighbors and hard work defines a person's character. David was a professional truck driver with years of experience hauling livestock throughout the Midwest. He owned a red Peterbilt semi-truck with white stripes and his wife Sarah's name painted on the passenger door. It was his pride and joy, a symbol of his dedication to providing for his family through honest labor. November 20th, 2023, began as a routine workday for David. He had been contracted to pick up a load of pigs from a hog confinement facility near Eagle Grove, Iowa, and transport them to Sac City. It was a standard job, the kind of routine livestock haul he had completed hundreds of times before. Eagle Grove and Sac City are both located in north-central Iowa, separated by approximately 60 miles of rural highways and county roads. The route between them cuts through some of America's most productive agricultural land. Endless cornfields stretch to the horizon, broken only by farmsteads and grain elevators that mark the locations of small farming communities. Around 7 o'clock that evening, David stopped by his home in Wall Lake for a quick shower before beginning his workday. His wife Sarah later recalled that he seemed completely normal. He was in a hurry to get on the road, but that was typical for David when he had a job to complete. "Love you, baby. Gotta go," David said as he kissed Sarah goodbye. He also kissed their grandson, who was visiting that evening. When their son Joseph called out from the living room asking about his goodbye, David replied, "No time, I gotta go, buddy. I'll see you tomorrow, though." Those would be the last words David's family would ever hear him speak. David left Wall Lake around 7:30 that evening, driving his Peterbilt semi toward Eagle Grove to pick up his cargo. The November weather was typical for Iowa. Cold but clear. Road conditions were good. Nothing suggested that this trip would be any different from the countless others David had completed safely. Between 10:30 and 11 o'clock that night, David arrived at the hog confinement facility near Eagle Grove. Witnesses confirmed that he successfully loaded his trailer with pigs and departed around 10:50 in the evening. The livestock loading had proceeded normally, with no unusual incidents or delays. After leaving Eagle Grove, David stopped at a truck stop where surveillance cameras captured him during what appeared to be a routine fuel and rest break. The video showed nothing unusual about his behavior or appearance. He seemed alert and focused, like any professional driver during a normal workday. When David left the truck stop, he headed west toward Sac City, where he was scheduled to deliver his cargo. Based on cell phone tower data, investigators were able to track his movements along the rural highways that connect Iowa's farming communities. But somewhere during that journey through the Iowa darkness, David Schultz vanished. November 21st dawned without any word from David. Sarah became increasingly worried as the hours passed with no communication from her husband. David always stayed in contact during his trips. He always let his family know when he had completed a delivery and was heading home. Sarah placed over 30 phone calls to David's cell phone throughout the day. Every call went straight to voicemail. Text messages received no response. By early afternoon, Sarah's concern had escalated to genuine fear. She reported David missing to local authorities at approximately 2:30 in the afternoon. 30 minutes after Sarah filed the missing person report, she received a call from David's phone. For a brief moment, she felt relief. Finally, her husband was calling to explain where he had been and why he hadn't been in touch. But the voice on the other end wasn't David's. It was a female officer, Sarah later recalled. She said, "We found your husband's truck and his wallet and his phone, but he's not here." David's red Peterbilt semi-truck had been discovered on Union Avenue in rural Sac County, Iowa. The massive vehicle was parked in the middle of the northbound lane of County Road N14, not far from where it intersects with D15. The trailer was still loaded with pigs, but David was nowhere to be found. The circumstances surrounding the truck's discovery were deeply disturbing. The vehicle was shut off, which was highly unusual for a professional driver during a delivery. Truckers typically keep their engines running to maintain power for lights, heat, and other essential systems. The truck's lights were off, and the key was still in the ignition. David's wallet and cell phone were inside the cab, with nothing missing from the wallet. Personal items including a towel, cell phone charger, and pocket knife were found with his coat on the opposite side of the road. The scene suggested that David had stopped his truck for some reason and then simply walked away. But why would an experienced driver shut off his engine and abandon his vehicle in the middle of a county road? What could have prompted him to leave his truck, his cargo, and all of his personal belongings? The Sac County Sheriff's Office immediately launched a comprehensive investigation into David's disappearance. They interviewed witnesses, analyzed cell phone records, and began searching the vast agricultural area surrounding the location where his truck had been found. The United Cajun Navy, a Louisiana-based non-profit organization that specializes in search and rescue operations, joined the effort to find David. Hundreds of volunteers from across Iowa and neighboring states participated in systematic searches of the countryside. Over the following weeks, search teams scoured more than 100,000 acres of farmland, pastures, and rural areas. They used everything from ground teams and horseback riders to aircraft and sophisticated scanning equipment. Every barn, every creek bed, every potential hiding place was examined. But the searches revealed no trace of David Schultz. He had vanished as completely as if the Iowa earth had simply swallowed him whole. Sarah Schultz refused to give up hope. She posted updates about her husband's case on social media every day, keeping his disappearance in the public eye. She called the circumstances suspicious and insisted that David would never have voluntarily left his family.
"This is not something David would do," Sarah repeatedly stated. "He would never leave. His family is his life." As weeks turned into months, the case began to attract attention from true crime enthusiasts and amateur investigators throughout the region. A reward fund was established, eventually reaching $28,400. The money included $25,000 in American Rescue Plan funds that Sac County had voted to earmark for the case. Christmas came and went without any sign of David. His twin boys faced their first holiday season without their father. Sarah maintained hope that David would be found alive, but as the months passed, that hope became increasingly difficult to sustain. Winter gave way to spring, and still there was no trace of the missing truck driver. The investigation remained active, but leads had dried up. Sac County Sheriff Ken McClure expressed confidence that the case would eventually be solved, but progress seemed minimal. Then, on April 24, 2024, exactly 5 months after David's disappearance, a farmer made a horrific discovery in his field. The farmer contacted the Sac County Sheriff's Office shortly before 2 o'clock in the afternoon to report that he had found a body in his field. The location was in the 1900 block of Union Avenue, near the intersection where David's abandoned truck had been discovered months earlier. The body was found approximately 1.5 miles from where David's semi-truck had been located. It was lying in an open field, face up, in an area that was flanked by cornfields and typical Iowa agricultural terrain. Sarah Schultz was notified of the discovery and asked to help with identification. Because of decomposition, dental records would be needed for official confirmation, but Sarah was able to provide crucial identifying information based on the boots the body was wearing. "I know they identified him by the boots because the last time he went and bought boots, he bought 2 pairs of the exact same ones," Sarah explained, "and I gave the sheriff one of the newer boots to have in comparison because it is an exact match." The Iowa Office of the State Medical Examiner conducted a forensic autopsy on the body. Dental records provided positive identification. The remains were confirmed to be those of David Schultz of Wall Lake, Iowa. Preliminary autopsy results showed no signs of trauma or serious injury. The Iowa Division of Criminal Investigation stated that they did not suspect foul play in David's death. Further testing was conducted, but the final results supported the initial findings. However, the discovery of David's body raised more questions than it answered. How had he ended up in a field 1.5 miles from his truck? Why had extensive searches of the area failed to locate his remains for 5 months? Jake Rowley, a leader in the volunteer search efforts who had become a spokesman for the Schultz family, expressed skepticism about the official findings. He questioned whether the state of decomposition was consistent with the body having been exposed to Iowa weather for 5 months. Rowley suggested that the decomposition did not align with what would be expected after 155 days in the elements. He raised the possibility that the body had been placed in the field more recently, after the initial searches had been completed. "There's a very good chance that the body wasn't there even when they searched," Rowley stated, "and that the body was placed thereafter." These concerns led the family to seek a second opinion autopsy from an independent medical examiner. They wanted additional analysis to determine if the official findings accurately reflected the circumstances of David's death. Sarah Schultz struggled to make sense of what had happened to her husband. She couldn't understand how David would have ended up in the middle of a field, miles from his truck, without any evidence of trauma or violence. "I can't think of any reason why he would have gone 1.5 miles into a field and lay down and taken his coat off and shut his truck off," Sarah said. "Truckers don't shut their trucks off. They don't shut them off until they're done for the day. He would have never shut the truck off. Things don't add up." Despite the family's concerns and questions, the Iowa Division of Criminal Investigation concluded its investigation by ruling that David's death was not a homicide. The final autopsy results were not released to the public, and officials indicated they probably would not be since there was no threat to community safety. The case was officially closed, but the mystery of what happened to David Schultz during those final hours of November 20, 2023, remains unsolved. The sequence of events that led from a routine livestock delivery to a body in an Iowa cornfield may never be fully understood. David's funeral was held in May 2024, bringing closure to a family that had endured 5 months of uncertainty and anguish. The community that had supported the search efforts came together to remember a man who had been known for his dedication to his family and his work. The red Peterbilt semi-truck that David had driven with such pride was eventually returned to his family. Sarah's name remained painted on the passenger door, a lasting reminder of a marriage that had been cut short by circumstances that defied explanation. The cornfields of Iowa returned to their seasonal cycle of planting, growing, and harvest. The intersection where David's truck had been found resumed its quiet existence as a crossing point for farmers and rural residents going about their daily lives. But the questions raised by David Schultz's disappearance and death continue to haunt those who knew him and those who followed his case. How does a professional truck driver simply vanish from a county road in rural Iowa? How does a comprehensive search effort involving hundreds of volunteers fail to locate remains in an open field? The case highlights the challenges faced by law enforcement when investigating disappearances in rural areas. The vast expanses of agricultural land in states like Iowa can conceal secrets for months or years. What seems like open, easily searchable terrain can hide evidence in ways that urban investigators might not anticipate. David's death also brought attention to the dangers faced by long-haul truck drivers who travel America's highways alone, often during overnight hours when help may be far away. These professional drivers form the backbone of America's transportation system, but they face risks that most people never consider. The immigrant workers who had participated in David's search efforts understood the importance of community support during times of crisis. Many of them were far from their own families and appreciated how the people of Iowa had come together to search for one of their own. The $28,400 reward fund established for information about David's case was never claimed. No one came forward with evidence that led to solving the mystery of his disappearance and death. The United Cajun Navy and other volunteer organizations that had participated in the search took lessons from the case that would help them in future missing person investigations. The challenges they encountered in Iowa's agricultural landscape provided valuable experience for similar cases. Sac County authorities maintained that they had conducted a thorough investigation and followed every lead available to them. They expressed confidence that their conclusion about David's death was supported by the evidence and forensic analysis. But for Sarah Schultz and her twin boys, the official conclusions could not provide the peace of mind that comes from truly understanding what happened to their husband and father. The questions that remained unanswered would continue to trouble them for years to come. David Schultz's story serves as a reminder that even in America's most familiar landscapes, mystery and tragedy can strike without warning or explanation. The Iowa farmland that had sustained generations of families had somehow claimed the life of a man who was simply trying to make an honest living. The next time you see a truck driver hauling livestock through rural America, remember David Schultz. Remember that these professional drivers face risks and challenges that extend far beyond the mechanical dangers of operating large vehicles on public highways. And remember that the vast agricultural landscapes of the American Midwest can conceal secrets that may never be fully revealed. Sometimes the answers we seek are buried as deeply in the soil as the crops that grow above them. David Schultz left his home in Wall Lake on a November evening to deliver a load of pigs to Sac City. He never completed that delivery. The mystery of what happened during those final hours of his life may be as enduring as the Iowa farmland where his body was finally found. The red Peterbilt truck that carried his dreams and supported his family sits silent now. But the questions raised by David's disappearance continue to echo across the cornfields of Iowa, reminding us that some mysteries resist all efforts to solve them.
What you're about to hear happened during Memorial Day weekend in 1995. This is the documented account of a 29-year-old truck driver who vanished into the Arizona wilderness under circumstances so bizarre that they defy rational explanation. His story has become one of America's most perplexing unsolved mysteries. This case involved multiple eyewitness encounters, extensive search operations, and the discovery of human remains 2 years after the initial disappearance. Every detail has been verified through Arizona law enforcement reports, witness statements, and forensic analysis. This is declassified horror, bringing you true stories where the vast American wilderness swallows people whole and leaves behind only fragments and questions. Devin Eugene Williams was 29 years old, a devoted husband and father of 3 children who lived with his family in Americus, Kansas. He worked as a long-distance truck driver for Flint Hill Transportation Company in Emporia, Kansas, hauling freight between the Midwest and West Coast. By all accounts, Devin was living the American dream in the spring of 1995. He and his wife had just purchased a new home and were making plans for their future together. His wife would later describe this period as the happiest point in their marriage. Everything was going perfectly for the Williams family. Devin was known as a pleasant and patient man who took pride in his work. Co-workers said the only time they ever saw him get irritated was when he had to wait for his truck to be loaded. He was always eager to complete his deliveries and get back home to his family. He was not the type of person to abandon his responsibilities or disappear without explanation. On May 23, 1995, Devin left his home in Americus and headed west on a route he had driven many times before. He was hauling a load to California, a routine trip that should have taken him across Kansas, Colorado, Utah, Nevada, and into the Golden State. The journey to California proceeded without incident. Devin delivered his cargo on schedule and prepared for the return trip to Kansas. He picked up a refrigerated shipment of lettuce and strawberries that needed to be transported back to Kansas City, Missouri. On the evening of May 26th, Devin checked in with his boss, Tom Wilson, as was his standard practice during long-haul trips. Tom later recalled that everything seemed completely normal during their conversation. Devin was on schedule, his cargo was secure, and he appeared to be in good spirits. Saturday evening, May 27th, Devin rolled into Kingman, Arizona, a small desert town that serves as a major truck stop along Interstate 40. Kingman sits in the high desert of northwestern Arizona, surrounded by rugged mountain ranges and vast expanses of wilderness. That evening, Devin made what would be his final contact with his employer. He called Tom Wilson again, but this time there was something different about the conversation. Devin complained that he was unable to sleep, despite his obvious fatigue from days of long-distance driving. Sleep deprivation is a serious concern for professional truck drivers. Federal regulations limit driving hours precisely because tired drivers pose enormous safety risks on America's highways. But Devin assured his boss that he would still be able to make his scheduled delivery in Kansas City on Monday morning. What happened next would transform a routine trucking run into one of the most bizarre disappearance cases in American history. Sunday morning, May 28, 1995, dawned clear and warm in Arizona's Tonto National Forest. The forest covers nearly 3 million acres of high desert and mountain terrain northeast of Phoenix. It's a popular destination for camping, hiking, and outdoor recreation, especially during holiday weekends. Lynn and Jack Yarrington were among the many people enjoying the Memorial Day weekend in the Tonto National Forest. They had set up camp in a remote area where the silence of nature provided a peaceful escape from urban life. The forest roads were narrow and primitive, suitable only for smaller four-wheel drive vehicles. The last thing the Yarringtons expected to see crashing through the woods was a 48-foot, 10-ton, 18-wheel semi-truck. The massive vehicle thundered through the forest roads with a deafening roar that shattered the morning tranquility. Lynn Yarrington was astonished to see such a large truck attempting to navigate forest roads that were clearly not designed for commercial vehicles. The truck appeared to be driving erratically, moving back and forth several times that morning. Other campers and outdoor enthusiasts reported similar encounters with the out-of-place semi-truck. The vehicle seemed to be careening recklessly through areas where it had no business being. Witnesses described near-miss collisions as the massive truck nearly ran over smaller vehicles on the narrow forest roads, but the most disturbing encounter occurred when a group of picnickers came upon a barefoot man standing in a clearing beside the stalled 18-wheeler. The man appeared to be in an agitated and confused state. He was holding a $20 bill in his hand and hitting it with a rock. The man was babbling incoherently about needing to light the grill. His behavior was so erratic and frightening that he threw the rock at the Yarringtons' car before they fled the scene, but not before they got a good look at his face. The witnesses were later shown photographs by law enforcement officers. They positively identified the disturbed man as Devin Williams, the missing truck driver from Kansas. When Devin failed to arrive for his scheduled Monday morning delivery in Kansas City, his employer contacted authorities. A missing person investigation was launched, and police began trying to piece together what had happened to the experienced driver. The connection between the missing trucker and the bizarre encounters in the Tonto National Forest was quickly established. Multiple witnesses had seen the same man acting strangely in the wilderness area. The abandoned semi-truck was located stuck in mud deep in the forest, but Devin Williams was nowhere to be found. The truck itself told a puzzling story. It was fully loaded with the refrigerated cargo of lettuce and strawberries that Devin had picked up in California. Nothing had been stolen from the trailer. The cab was locked, and the keys were missing. Some of Devin's personal belongings were still in the truck, including his briefcase, ice chest, and sleeping bag. But other items were missing, including his duffel bag and favorite audio tapes. This led some investigators to speculate that Devin might have left voluntarily, but anyone who knew Devin rejected this theory completely. He was not the type of person to abandon a fully loaded truck worth hundreds of thousands of dollars. He had never shown any indication of wanting to leave his family or his job. The idea that he would simply walk away from his life made no sense to those who knew him best. Search and rescue teams were deployed throughout the Tonto National Forest. The operation involved Sheriff's Department personnel, search dogs, foot patrols, and off-road vehicles. Hundreds of square miles of rugged wilderness were systematically searched. The Tonto National Forest is known for its challenging terrain and abundant wildlife. Black bears, bobcats, and mountain lions roam the area.
The Mogollon Rim, a massive cliff formation that cuts across central Arizona, creates dramatic elevation changes and numerous hiding places where a person could disappear completely. Despite extensive search efforts, no trace of Devin Williams was found. The investigation continued for months, but leads dried up and the case grew cold. Devin's family was left with unanswered questions and the agonizing uncertainty of not knowing what had happened to their loved one. Nearly 2 years passed without any developments in the case. Devin's wife, Mary Lou, and their 3 children struggled to move forward with their lives while still hoping for answers about his fate. Then, on May 2, 1997, 2 hikers made a grim discovery that would provide partial closure to the Williams family while raising even more disturbing questions. The hikers were exploring the bottom of the Mogollon Rim near the intersection of Forest Road 321 and Rim Road 300 in Gila County. This area was approximately a quarter mile from where Devin had last been seen alive in the Tonto National Forest. There, partially concealed by desert vegetation, they found a human skull. The skull was transported to the Arizona Medical Examiner's office for forensic analysis. Dental records provided positive identification. The remains belonged to Devin Eugene Williams, but the discovery of Devin's skull raised more questions than it answered. There was no evidence of obvious trauma to the bone, making it impossible to determine a cause of death. No other human remains were found in the immediate area. The location where the skull was discovered had been searched previously during the initial investigation. How had searchers missed finding human remains in an area they had already covered? Had the skull been moved by animals or natural forces, or had it been placed there by someone after the original search efforts? The forensic analysis could not determine whether Devin had died from natural causes, accident, or violence. The skull alone was insufficient to establish a cause of death or even estimate when death had occurred. Toxicology tests were impossible without soft tissue samples. The mystery of what had happened to Devin Williams during those final hours in the Arizona wilderness remained unsolved. Several theories emerged to explain Devin's bizarre behavior and ultimate disappearance. Some investigators suggested that he might have suffered a diabetic episode. Devin was known to be a mild diabetic, and such episodes can cause confusion, disorientation, and erratic behavior. Sleep deprivation was another possible explanation. Devin had complained of insomnia during his final phone call to his employer. Severe sleep deprivation can cause hallucinations, paranoia, and irrational behavior that might explain his actions in the forest. Carbon monoxide poisoning was also considered as a possibility. A leak in the truck's exhaust system could have caused gradual poisoning that would explain Devin's increasingly erratic behavior as he drove through Arizona. Mental illness was another theory, although Devin had no history of psychological problems. However, some mental health conditions can manifest suddenly, especially under stress or in combination with other factors like sleep deprivation or medical issues. Drug use was investigated but ruled out. Devin had no history of substance abuse, and those who knew him described him as a responsible family man who took his job seriously. Some people even suggested more exotic explanations. The Tonto National Forest is located in an area of Arizona known for reported UFO sightings and other unexplained phenomena. A few conspiracy theorists proposed that Devin might have encountered something supernatural or extraterrestrial, but none of these theories could be proven or disproven based on the available evidence. The discovery of only a skull, with no other remains or definitive forensic evidence, left investigators with nothing but speculation. The case attracted attention from television shows like Unsolved Mysteries, which featured Devin's disappearance in an attempt to generate new leads. The exposure brought the case to national attention, but failed to produce any breakthrough information. Devin's family filed a workers' compensation claim against Flint Hill Transportation Company, arguing that his death had resulted from the course of his employment as an over-the-road trucker. The claim was denied by an administrative law judge and upheld on appeal, leaving the family without financial recourse. The years passed, but the questions surrounding Devin Williams's disappearance never faded. True crime enthusiasts and amateur investigators continued to study the case, proposing new theories and analysis, but no definitive answers emerged. The wilderness area where Devin vanished remains largely unchanged from that Memorial Day weekend in 1995. The Tonto National Forest continues to attract campers, hikers, and outdoor enthusiasts who come to experience Arizona's rugged natural beauty. But some visitors to the forest report an uneasy feeling when they visit the area where Devin was last seen. The forest roads where his truck careened wildly still wind through the same remote terrain. The clearing where witnesses saw him acting strangely still sits quietly among the desert vegetation. Wildlife in the Tonto National Forest could explain why only Devin's skull was ever found. Mountain lions, bears, and coyotes are all capable of scattering human remains across vast areas. The harsh desert environment would have accelerated decomposition and made the recovery of complete remains unlikely. But this explanation doesn't address the fundamental mystery of what caused Devin's bizarre behavior in the first place. What had transformed a reliable, experienced truck driver into a confused, agitated man throwing rocks at strangers in the Arizona wilderness? The case highlights the vulnerability of long-haul truck drivers who travel America's highways alone, often through remote areas where help may be hours or days away. These professional drivers form the backbone of America's transportation system, but they face risks that most people never consider. Devin's story also demonstrates how quickly someone can vanish in America's vast wilderness areas. Despite extensive search efforts using modern technology and trained personnel, a person can disappear completely in terrain that offers countless hiding places and natural hazards. The investigation into Devin Williams's disappearance officially remains open, although no active efforts are currently being made to solve the case. Arizona law enforcement agencies maintain the file in case new evidence emerges, but after nearly 30 years, such developments seem unlikely. For Devin's family, the discovery of his skull provided some measure of closure, but could not answer the questions that continued to haunt them. They knew where he had died, but they would never know why or how. The true crime community continues to debate the merits of various theories about what happened to Devin Williams. Online forums and social media groups devoted to unsolved mysteries regularly discuss his case, with amateur investigators proposing new angles and interpretations of the evidence. But after nearly 3 decades, the mystery remains as perplexing as it was on that Memorial Day weekend, when witnesses saw a fool in the forest, acting in ways that defied explanation. The Tonto National Forest keeps its secrets well. Among the towering cliffs of the Mogollon Rim and the endless expanse of high desert terrain, the truth about Devin Williams's final hours may be buried as deeply as the ancient geological formations that define this dramatic landscape. Professional truck drivers who travel through Arizona today sometimes pause when they pass through Kingman, remembering the story of a fellow driver who took a wrong turn into the wilderness and never found his way back to the highway. The last communication from Devin Williams was a phone call complaining of insomnia and assuring his boss that he would make his delivery on schedule. Within hours, he would be driving erratically through forest roads, throwing rocks at strangers, and babbling about lighting a grill. What happened during those intervening hours remains one of America's most baffling unsolved mysteries. Somewhere in the vast wilderness of the Tonto National Forest, the truth about Devin Williams waits to be discovered. But after nearly 30 years of silence, that truth may remain forever hidden among the rocks and desert vegetation. The next time you drive through Arizona's high desert country, remember Devin Williams. Remember that even experienced professional drivers can find themselves in situations that defy explanation. Remember that America's wilderness can swallow people whole and leave behind only fragments and questions. And remember that some mysteries resist all attempts to solve them. Some disappearances leave behind only a skull in the desert, and the haunting question of what could drive a rational man to such irrational behavior in his final moments. The fool in the forest took his secrets with him when he died. The Arizona wilderness keeps those secrets still.
What you're about to hear happened in the pre-dawn darkness of March 26, 2024. This is the documented account of one of the most catastrophic infrastructure failures in modern American history. A disaster that claimed 6 lives and brought one of the nation's busiest ports to a complete standstill. This tragedy involved a 984-foot cargo ship, a major interstate bridge, and 8 construction workers who were simply doing their jobs when disaster struck. Every detail has been verified through National Transportation Safety Board investigations, Coast Guard reports, and Maryland State Police documentation. This is declassified horror, bringing you true stories where routine maintenance becomes a death trap and where some of America's most vital infrastructure proves vulnerable to forces beyond human control. The Francis Scott Key Bridge was a marvel of modern engineering. Opened in 1977, the 1.6-mile span carried Interstate 695 across the Patapsco River, connecting Baltimore's industrial heartland to the wider transportation network of the East Coast. Every day, 34,000 vehicles crossed this bridge. 3,000 of them were commercial trucks, hauling everything from automobiles to hazardous materials that were prohibited from using Baltimore's harbor tunnels. The bridge was a lifeline for Maryland's economy and a crucial link in America's supply chain. But the Francis Scott Key Bridge served another vital purpose. It carried traffic over one of the busiest shipping channels in the United States. The lower Patapsco River connects the port of Baltimore to the Chesapeake Bay and ultimately to the Atlantic Ocean. In 2023 alone, the port had handled over 52 million tons of foreign cargo valued at $80 billion. March 26, 2024, began like any other Tuesday for the maintenance crew working on the Francis Scott Key Bridge. 8 construction workers employed by Brawner Builders had been assigned to fill potholes on the bridge deck. It was routine maintenance work, the kind of unglamorous but essential labor that keeps America's infrastructure functioning. These were hard-working men, many of them immigrants who had come to the United States seeking better lives for their families. They worked the overnight shift when traffic was lightest and construction work could proceed safely. They understood the risks of working on a major highway bridge, but they also knew that someone had to do the job. At 1 o'clock in the morning, the container ship Dali departed from its berth at the Dundalk Marine Terminal. The Singapore-flagged vessel was 984 feet long and loaded with cargo containers destined for Colombo, Sri Lanka. It was a routine departure from one of America's busiest ports. The Dali was operated by an experienced crew and guided by a local harbor pilot who knew every detail of the Patapsco River's navigation channels. The ship had passed overseas inspections in 2023 and had what officials would later describe as a fairly good safety record. As the massive vessel made its way up the Patapsco River toward the Francis Scott Key Bridge, everything appeared normal. The ship was following the established shipping channel, maintaining proper speed, and operating within all safety protocols. Nothing suggested that disaster was only minutes away. At 1:23 in the morning, a live-stream camera captured the Dali coming into view as it approached the Key Bridge. The massive ship appeared to be on course to pass safely under the span, just as thousands of vessels had done since the bridge opened nearly 50 years earlier. But something was terribly wrong aboard the Dali. At 1:24 in the morning, the ship's lights suddenly went dark. The massive vessel had experienced what officials would later describe as a momentary loss of propulsion. In the critical moments before impact, the ship's power systems failed. The Dali's crew immediately recognized the gravity of their situation. Without power, the massive ship was essentially a 984-foot projectile heading directly toward one of Baltimore's most important bridges. They had only minutes to prevent a catastrophe. At 1:26 in the morning, the crew issued a mayday call. They alerted the Coast Guard and local authorities that their ship was out of control and heading toward the Francis Scott Key Bridge. It was a desperate attempt to warn anyone who might be in the vessel's path. The mayday call triggered immediate action by Baltimore authorities. Police officers raced to both ends of the bridge to stop traffic from entering the span. Their quick response would prevent what could have been a much larger disaster involving dozens of vehicles and hundreds of potential victims, but there was no time to evacuate the 8 construction workers who were filling potholes directly above the ship's path. They were working in the center section of the bridge, exactly where the out-of-control vessel was heading. They had no idea that death was approaching at 8 knots. At 1:28 in the morning, the Dali struck a support column of the Francis Scott Key Bridge. The impact was devastating. The ship was traveling at approximately 9 miles per hour, but its enormous mass created a force that the bridge simply could not withstand. The collision triggered what engineers call a progressive collapse. When the support column failed, it caused a catastrophic chain reaction that brought down the entire center section of the bridge. The span that had carried traffic safely for nearly 50 years disintegrated in seconds. The 8 construction workers had no chance to escape. As the bridge deck beneath them crumbled, they plunged into the frigid waters of the Patapsco River. Some fell directly into the water. Others were trapped in their vehicles as the bridge collapsed around them. 2 workers were pulled from the water alive in the immediate aftermath of the collapse. One was uninjured and refused medical treatment. The other was seriously hurt but survived and was treated at a local trauma center. They were the fortunate ones. 6 construction workers remained missing in the dark, cold waters of the Patapsco River. The water temperature was approximately 50 degrees Fahrenheit. Even the strongest swimmers would have difficulty surviving more than a few minutes in such conditions, especially while wearing heavy work clothing and safety equipment. Baltimore Fire Chief James Wallace immediately deployed sonar equipment to search the debris field. The underwater scanning revealed the presence of multiple submerged vehicles near the collapsed section of the bridge. 3 passenger cars, a cement truck, and other vehicles had gone into the water when the span fell, but authorities did not believe anyone had been inside the civilian vehicles. The quick action by police in stopping traffic had prevented commuters from driving onto the doomed bridge. The mayday call from the Dali's crew had saved countless lives. Even though it came too late to save the construction workers, the search for the missing workers continued throughout Tuesday, but conditions were extremely challenging. The water depth in the collapse area was approximately 50 feet.
Debris from the collapsed bridge created a dangerous underwater obstacle course that made diving operations extremely hazardous. As Tuesday night approached, Coast Guard Rear Admiral Shannon Gilreath made the grim announcement that rescue operations were being suspended. "We do not believe that we're going to find any of these individuals still alive," he said. The search for survivors had become a recovery mission for victims. Wednesday morning brought dive teams equipped for underwater recovery operations. Working in 25 feet of water near the middle span of the collapsed bridge, divers made the first heartbreaking discovery. A red pickup truck was located on the river bottom with 2 bodies inside. Maryland State Police Superintendent Roland Butler identified the victims as Alejandro Hernandez Fuentes, 35 years old, originally from Mexico but living in Baltimore, and Dorian Roniel Castillo Cabrera, 26 years old, originally from Guatemala but living in Dundalk. One victim was identified by a driver's license found in his pocket. The other was identified through fingerprint analysis. Both men had been construction workers employed by Brawner builders. They had been filling potholes when the bridge collapsed beneath them. The discovery of 2 bodies in the red pickup truck confirmed everyone's worst fears about the remaining missing workers. 4 more men were still unaccounted for, presumed dead somewhere in the debris field that had once been the Francis Scott Key Bridge. Sonar readings detected additional vehicles encased in concrete and twisted steel debris. The recovery of the remaining victims would have to wait until salvage operations could safely clear enough wreckage to allow divers to continue their grim work. The 4 missing workers were identified by immigrant assistance groups and their families. Miguel Luna was a 49-year-old father of 3 from El Salvador. Mena Suazo Sandoval was a husband and father of 2 from Honduras. Jose Minor Lopez was 37 years old and from Guatemala. Carlos Hernandez was also among the missing. These men represented the immigrant workforce that builds and maintains much of America's infrastructure. They had left their home countries seeking better opportunities for their families. They worked dangerous jobs that many others would not take, and they died while keeping America's bridges safe for the traveling public. The collapse of the Francis Scott Key Bridge had consequences far beyond the tragic loss of life. The port of Baltimore was immediately shut down to all shipping traffic. No vessels could enter or leave the harbor until the shipping channel could be cleared of bridge debris. The economic impact was immediate and severe. The port of Baltimore handles more automobiles and light trucks than any other port in the United States. In 2023, it had processed over 847,000 vehicles. Suddenly, this crucial supply chain link was completely severed. President Joe Biden declared that the federal government would cover the full cost of rebuilding the bridge and called on Congress to support the reconstruction effort. Transportation Secretary Pete Buttigieg warned that rebuilding would not be quick, easy, or cheap, but promised that it would get done. 8,000 dock workers were immediately thrown out of work by the port closure. Shipping companies scrambled to divert cargo to alternative ports along the East Coast. The ripple effects of the bridge collapse spread throughout the American economy within hours of the disaster. The recovery of victims continued for weeks as salvage crews slowly cleared debris from the shipping channel. On May 1st, the body of Miguel Angel Luna Gonzalez was recovered from a red truck that had been among the missing construction vehicles. On May 7th, the 6th and final body, Jose Minor Lopez, was finally found. The investigation into the cause of the collapse focused on the Dali's loss of power and the adequacy of the bridge's protective systems. The ship had experienced what officials called a momentary loss of propulsion, but the exact cause of this failure remained under investigation. Critics questioned why the Francis Scott Key Bridge lacked adequate protective barriers around its support columns. Many modern bridges include systems designed to prevent ship collisions or to absorb the impact if a collision occurs. The Key Bridge had been built in an era when such protections were not considered necessary. The National Transportation Safety Board launched a comprehensive investigation into every aspect of the disaster. They examined the ship's mechanical systems, the crew's actions, the bridge's design, and the emergency response procedures. The investigation would take months to complete. Mexican President Andrés Manuel López Obrador used the tragedy to highlight the contributions that immigrants make to the American economy. He noted that migrants often take dangerous jobs working overnight shifts to keep vital infrastructure functioning safely. The Latino community in Baltimore created a memorial for the construction workers at the south end of the bridge. Flowers, candles, and photographs honored the memory of 6 men who had died while working to maintain the infrastructure that millions of people depended on every day. Maryland Governor Wes Moore signed legislation to provide financial assistance to port workers and businesses affected by the bridge collapse. The state established a $12.5 million program to prevent layoffs and help companies weather the economic disruption. The Army Corps of Engineers took charge of clearing the shipping channel and removing debris from the Patapsco River. Heavy lift cranes were brought in to remove submerged sections of the bridge. The process would take months and cost hundreds of millions of dollars. As cleanup operations continued, investigators worked to determine exactly how the Dali had lost power at such a critical moment. The ship's crew remained cooperative throughout the investigation, providing detailed accounts of the mechanical failure that had led to the collision. The tragedy raised fundamental questions about the vulnerability of America's aging infrastructure to modern shipping traffic. The Francis Scott Key Bridge had been designed for the cargo ships of the 1970s, not the massive container vessels that dominate maritime trade today. Shipping channels throughout the United States were re-evaluated for similar vulnerabilities. Bridges that had been considered safe for decades were suddenly viewed as potential targets for accidental collisions by increasingly large cargo vessels. The 6 construction workers who died in the collapse were remembered as heroes who had dedicated their lives to maintaining America's infrastructure. They had worked overnight shifts in dangerous conditions to keep bridges safe for the millions of people who crossed them every day. Their deaths highlighted the often invisible workforce of immigrants who build and maintain the systems that keep America functioning. These men had left their home countries seeking better lives, only to die while serving their adopted homeland. The Francis Scott Key Bridge had stood for nearly 50 years as a symbol of Baltimore's connection to the global economy. Its collapse in a matter of seconds demonstrated how quickly disaster can strike even the most carefully engineered structures. The disaster serves as a stark reminder that America's infrastructure is more vulnerable than most people realize. The bridges we cross every day, the ports that handle our imports and exports, and the shipping channels that connect us to the world economy all depend on systems that can fail catastrophically. The next time you cross a major bridge or see cargo ships in a harbor, remember the 6 construction workers who died when the Francis Scott Key Bridge collapsed. Remember that someone has to maintain these vital systems, often working in dangerous conditions that most people never see. And remember that the immigrant workforce that builds and maintains America's infrastructure deserves recognition for the risks they take and the contributions they make. The men who died filling potholes on a Baltimore bridge were not just construction workers. They were the unsung heroes who keep America moving. The waters of the Patapsco River continue to flow past the site where the Francis Scott Key Bridge once stood. But those waters now hold the memory of 6 men who died while working to keep America's infrastructure safe and functional. Their deaths remind us that behind every bridge, every highway, and every port facility are human beings who risk their lives to maintain the systems we all depend on. The price of infrastructure is sometimes measured not just in dollars and materials, but in human lives. The collapse of the Francis Scott Key Bridge will be remembered as one of the most significant infrastructure disasters in modern American history. But it should also be remembered as a tribute to the immigrant workers who build and maintain the systems that make modern life possible. 6 men went to work filling potholes on a Tuesday morning in March. They never came home. Their sacrifice reminds us that the infrastructure we take for granted comes at a cost that is sometimes paid in blood.